successful in their Christian walk. They want the church to grow and to be successful. And obviously, even with our country, we want success. And so we can see some of these traits when we look at it and see how they affect us. So, chapter 3 of the book of Exodus, we have God calling Moses from the burning bush. Some of us in this room will be familiar with the story a little bit. But Moses has left, he's been 40 years away from Egypt. And then God calls him from this burning bush and basically says, I'm going to send you back and you're going to deliver my people from their slavery. Now, Moses becomes hesitant. Why would he become hesitant?
Fear of saying the wrong thing.
Well, that could be it. I'm a little bit afraid. There's a reason for his fear. Yes.
He got run out of town.
He ran out of town because he thought last time when I left, they were going to kill me. Okay. Ultimately, he killed somebody else that was an Egyptian, and he leaves because he figures he's going to receive capital punishment. Okay. He's not going to be able to live. So going back, even after 40 years, last time I left, I wasn't very popular. Okay, yes.
He doesn't think they will believe him.
Maybe they don't think they believe him. That's going to come to really key in chapter 4, and Moses starts considering, who am I to go to these people? They hadn't seen me for 40 years. They may know who I am, a lot of the Israelites that were there years ago, but I mean, I left. All of them got stuck, and I took off on them. And I've been living in the desert. Chapter 3, and verses 10 through 12, it says, he says, and now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh. You may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? Okay, and so Moses gets a little bit of reassurance. You read the rest of the passage here. God says, you're going to worship on this mountain. You are going to be able to do this. I have full confidence in you. I'm going to, this is a mission that I'm asking you to do. But there's a hesitation here. This is a big job for a person who's been a shepherd for 40 years, okay, and not wanting to go back. I don't think he ever had a plan on going back. His idea was, I'm never going back to that place. But we're going to look at just a few questions here. In chapter 4, if you skip a little bit ahead, when he calls Moses has, like I said, some hesitation. And God actually asked him, we're going to look at a few here and then we're going to skip ahead, some questions. Chapter 4, and verses 1 through 5. Brian, you read that for me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. They will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it down on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you.
Okay, this seems like a weird question. A lot of these are going to be strange questions. What was the question that was asked?
What's in your hand?
What's in your hand? That just seems kind of, I've got a staff in my hand. Okay. What's in your hand? I don't think that God is asking him specifically that he didn't know that it was a staff. Okay. What does Moses see in his hand?
A staff, a stick, or something that's...
He just sees a stick, right?
Yeah.
Nothing special, nothing important. It's not until he throws it on the ground it becomes a snake and he has to pick it back up, which, by the way, picking up the snake would have been the hardest part, right? Reach down and grab it by the tail. The throwing it down and turning the snake may be a big deal, but picking it back up. What did Moses not see? The snake, right? Or the power that could be of the staff. What is this in your hand? All he could see was the one thing. What is it that we see, maybe in this case, that Moses may be lacking and being hesitant about? Why does he not want to go?
Ultimately, it's faith.
Okay, yeah.
Faith in what God's telling him to do. He's questioning that. He's questioning his ability.
So there's a question, we're gonna find this is in the second question that he asked too, that there is a question about himself. One of the main traits that we need when we go out and what he needed, and maybe a little bit of problem for Moses, was some courage, right? Some faith and courage in God. Courage to stand, look, who's he going to? I mean, Pharaoh is not just anybody, right? Pharaoh is a ruler, and not even a great, and you know, it's probably not the same Pharaoh, but it would have been a person who knew who Moses was. It'd been somebody that was in his house. Remember, Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house, so he would have known the powers that be, no matter if it had been 40 years or not. Okay, one of the things, there's a little bit of well, what if I go, okay, and he asked this question to him, what if they will not believe or listen to what I say? That's fear right there, right? What if they don't believe me? What then? They may deliver me over to Pharaoh. What if I get killed? Okay, that's a possibility. And I think a lot of times when you think about just in this one area, you find that Moses is lacking that courage to right at this point. He does end up going, but at this point he doesn't really want to go. For us, how does that keep us from meeting or achieving our goals? How does a lack of courage keep us from receiving our goals? This can be your life, church, what?
You hold back.
Go ahead, Shane.
You hold back.
Okay, we hold back sometimes we shouldn't. Don't try things that we know that could or may. Why? Because it might not work, right? I remember the first time that I did a vacation Bible school, I was a new preacher, and the church there had not done a vacation Bible school for, they couldn't remember, but they said way back, okay? And I won't tell you how many people said, well, it won't work. Now, I'm telling you, I'm a young preacher, early 20s, and I'm going, I spent $2,000 and something, okay, on a vacation Bible school. Now, you take this back some years, more than they probably did. And of course, the whole way, I told them one thing I didn't want to do is question what I did. It did get success, by the way, by the good Lord's giving. Okay, I think we had 120 something kids, which I was not paying but for 50. But in reality, there was a little fear. What if I spend $2,000 in the church money on this thing and I get 5 kids? You know, that was a possibility too, right? Think about in our personal lives this sometimes as well. Why are we not teaching other people? Why do we not say the things we need to say? Why do we not? Yes.
I think one thing too, we have to understand, we rely on me. And I think here, God was showing Moses, you know, I'm going to send you out there to do my job, and I want you to rely on me. You know, and I think that's our downfall most of the time. Yes, we might be timid in stepping out, but we have to put ourselves in a position to say, I am not the one doing it. God is going to work through me.
That's right.
You know, so.
That's right. And I think that's a difficult thing for us sometimes, is to trust in God. God saw more than a staff. He asked the question, what do you see? That's all, what do you got in your hand? All he saw was the thing. Now, we can look at scripture, John 14 and verse 17. I'm going to really quickly go through these to get to the next point, but I do think they're important because it's not the only place that tells us we need to rely on God. Here, 14 verse 15, he says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Then he goes on verse 17, the helper, the spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, does not see him or because him, but you know him because he remains with you, and you will be in you. He'll be in you. He's telling them there's going to be some confidence, some strength, that God is going to bless them. Verse 27, he tells them that he will be with them, not to be afraid, in the same sense. Psalm 56 and verse 3 and 4, I like these verses. It says, when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? And I think that when we read some Psalms, we find that confidence, that trust, and that courage to sometimes overcome. Moses had trouble a trait that he was not didn't have, and he's pointing out, look, you don't have to just rely on yourself. You gotta have the courage to step forward. Which brings me to the next point. Look at verse 10, chapter 4, verse 10 through 13. Somebody wants to read that, they can. Exodus 4, 10 through 13.
And Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken to thy servant. But I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. And the Lord said to him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf? Or to the seeing or to the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well, and also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart.
Okay, so we're going to get here to a couple of questions here specifically. What's the second question here we have? Who has made
Man's mouth.
Who's made man's mouth? And then right after he asks the same, very similar thing, right? Or who makes anyone unable to speak or deaf or able to see or blind? So we see that he's reasoning. So these questions, again, are not questions. God is trying to have Moses reason for himself. Who's made man's mouth? You mentioned a while ago something that he was lacking that was pretty important. Who is it that he's worried about? Moses.
Himself.
So,
We're pretty good at, for most part, we know we have weaknesses. We can put on the air that we don't, but most of us know it. Moses definitely knows he is not everything. I mean, he's been a shepherd, but he's not really a cocky kind of person and everything. One of his flaws, what does he think is one of his flaws? I'm not eloquent. Maybe he was not. I don't know if he was or not. Paul says he wasn't, and Paul did a lot of great things for things. But he says, I can't speak. I don't know how to speak. And God asks this question, who made your mouth, or who makes someone talk, or whatever? One of the things, there's a trait here that's pretty important that Moses still lacks, and that's confidence in himself. Now, there's something we'll look at in a minute of being overconfident, but there's also a fact that sometimes you can be underconfident. Does his confidence have to rely on himself completely? What is God asking? Not about the mouth, is it? Who's going to give him what he needs to say? The confidence that we gain as Christians, it has to be within us a little bit to be confident in what we believe. We should study and grow and understand, but we also should have some confidence in God. If God sent in Moses to do a job, could God not give him the words to speak? Who's made your mouth? Who's made somebody speak or talk or and basically he says, send it by somebody else. You know, I'm not it. Okay, I'm not the one who can do it. Moses realizes his own weaknesses, but he doesn't realize the power that God has given or can give in this. And I think that also affects sometimes the success we have in life or the ability that we live in our Christian life. How many times do we doubt our own abilities, our own capabilities? Why do we not take on a new role in the church? Why do we not try something that we've never tried? Why are we not out in the world doing something to help and serve? And maybe a lot of it comes down to I kind of doubt if I can do it. And all of us probably have felt that little feel of like, man, that's not my talent, or I don't know if I'll be good at that. And maybe we won't. There's some jobs that not everybody's meant to be a song leader, okay? Not everybody's meant to preach or to do other roles that are in the church. But there are sometimes the ability, there should be ability to try to learn and grow and do things. But these doubts get in our head.
I would say when you're younger, you're always doubting what you know. The older you get, you're always comparing what you know to something that you've seen that was like you would like it to be for you. And maybe he's been around people who speak eloquently, and he's like, I don't speak like them.
Probably.
So, I know some people who could talk a lot better than I can. Why are you choosing me?
And that is really hard to overcome.
Right.
And as a minister, I will say when I first started my ministry, that's a question you see other ministers. I've seen ministers try to copy other ministers, When they're young, they will do that. You will see a young preacher right off school, they'll copy whatever their teacher, they'll try to plan it exactly how that other person, but they're not that other person. And you have to learn really quickly, I can't preach or teach like somebody else because I'm not them. It's like somebody trying to tell a joke of somebody who's funny, but the joke when they tell it's not really funny because they're not the same person telling the joke. Okay, some people just have it and some people don't. It's the same kind of idea in certain areas. We have to learn to be ourselves, but in all of this, we've got to learn to overcome the questions, the doubts. I'm not like him. And this is Moses' problem, confidence in himself. He's like, you could find somebody who probably could speak better than me. And that may be true. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 and 6. He tells us he'll always be with us here and everything. He says, he repeats what I just read a while ago. What can man do to me? Okay, what is it that man can do to me? If God is my helper, what can man do to me? Right? He'll always be there. He will take care of us. He'll protect us. So we got to have some trust in the power and ability of what God gives for us. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 tells us we come boldly before the throne of grace. Okay, we got to become, that word boldly can be confident before God in requesting Him. Philippians 4 verse 13, we sometimes misuse this verse. It's a good verse. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, but it's not through myself. This is the problem, is I can't do all things and leave it at that. It's when Christ lets us and helps us. That's something Moses is missing here, that God is going with him. And so his confidence should come from the Lord. Our confidence is the same way. It should come from the Lord. Verse 14 through 17 here. The anger of the Lord burned here against Moses. It says, it's not this brother Aaron the Levite. I know that he speaks fluently. So Aaron is a speaker. Aaron, though, has lived in, he hadn't lived with Moses, has he? 40 years. He's his brother, but I know he speaks fluently. And moreover, behold, he's coming out to meet you. Where he sees you, he will be overjoyed. So you are to speak to him and put the words of the mouth, and I myself, he with your mouth in his mouth, and I will instruct. You're able to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he will be as a mouth for you, and you will be as God to him. But he asked a question here. Is this not your brother Aaron the Levite? There's actually a question written here. Is this not Aaron, your brother the Levite? That seems like, again, he knows. Does Moses know who his brother is? Does God know who his brother is? This is not a question. These are all questions God is asking. He doesn't just tell him, there comes your brother. He actually says, this is not, do you have a brother? And actually, if you read in certain versions, it's probably better to say, is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? Don't you have a brother, Aaron the Levite? He speaks fluently. I wonder why he says this. Moses thinks he's got to do it alone. There's a trait that's important here too for us in the church. What did you say?
God already worked it out. He just didn't realize it.
Hey, God's already working it out. Are we really alone? Not just with God. I think within the church, let's just talk about the church. It could be in our personal lives. Whether our family, if we have a family, don't we have people within the family that can help us? But in the church, isn't it a work as a team? Do we all have the same roles, same talents, same abilities? Most like, I can't do this. He's like, have you forgotten there's other people? God had not just called Moses. Aaron is going to be the first high priest, by the way, not Moses. Which is of all the jobs, the high priest was probably, it was for the kingdom more important than a king. Really and truly. The high priest had the top position. It's not going to be Moses. And sometimes I think that's our problem within the church. It could be in our families, could be in our businesses, our jobs. How often have you seen a problem in your job because people don't want to work together? They want to do it themselves. Okay, and they miscommunicate. Churches are like that. I'm going here, I'm going there. Moses thinks I got to do it all by myself. He says, you don't have a brother? Have you forgotten that you have other people? Yeah, go ahead.
Moses, his real problem is that he's just afraid. He lacked the courage, and he was afraid of going back, and they'd put him to death. Mm-hmm. So here's the excuses now he's trying to put in place. Oh, I can't speak. I'm not that fluent in speaking. But notice that God tells him, you have a brother who can speak well. Now you tell him what to say. But I can't speak.
But you can tell Aaron.
But you can tell Aaron what to say. Right?
That's
so you tell Aaron what to say. And I will also tell him what to say. But yesterday you say, I can't speak.
Sometimes it's just an excuse.
It's just an excuse.
It's just an excuse. And I think that's the important part. Like when I think about us together, I think it plagues families. Families forget that they're working together. Marriages will forget that they're actually supposed to be on the same team. Troubled marriages, a lot of times, you can look within it. And I've done a lot talking to couples that do have challenges once in a while. And all couples have challenges once in a while. But a lot of times the bigger ones is because they forgot that they're actually supposed to be working together. They're supposed to be one flesh. They're a unit. And when people start seeing themselves as two individuals clashing, that's when the problems happen. That they're no longer connecting or working. If we're both wanting the same outcome, then giving a little bit, learning to work together is important. And this teamwork also within the church. It plagues churches when you have this wanting to do this wanting to do this, and we forget. If we want to make a difference in the world, it's all of us. We need each other. We need each other. Once we forget that, or we think someone's not important, we'll find ourselves weaker in the long run. And our success, the things we want to see happen, won't happen. That goes in our personal lives as well. Good counselors are quite important. Romans 14 and verse 19 makes this statement, says, so let us pursue the things which make for peace and building up of one another. He's talking within the church. We're supposed to be working together. 1 Corinthians 1:10 tells us that we're to have the same mind, the same goals as a church. That was a problem with the church of Corinth. That's sometimes problems today. We should be looking at what is important for us and what are the goals for the future. How to get there may be a little different. Ephesians chapter 4, 11 and 12 tells us that he gave some with different talents here for the building up of the body. You have a different talent than me. I have a different talent. There's things that I'm not good at. There's things that you won't be good at. But when we put us together, I don't know if Moses was an eloquent speaker or not. I know that when we look at people in the scripture, Paul says he did not speak well. But you remember Apollos? Apollos, it said, was a very eloquent speaker. Very eloquent. Who taught him? Aquila and Priscilla. Who taught Aquila and Priscilla? So they all had an impact. Okay, and they didn't compare themselves to other people in those abilities. So I think that when we look at these questions, God is leading Moses to consider. Now I'm going to skip a little bit to a place, and this one is not specifically asking. This is not asking Moses. This is actually asked on the opposite side, and that is to Pharaoh. Actually, God through his men asked Pharaoh a question, and I think it was interesting. Obviously, Pharaoh doesn't have an answer, but in Exodus chapter 5 and go back to Exodus chapter 5 verse 2, you find that there's a stubbornness in Pharaoh, because remember the message is, let my people go. And in verse 2 it says, Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I shall obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides I will not let Israel go. Ezekiel has several chapters designated just to this story, and basically says it was to his dying breath. He was not going to let the people go. He really did not want to have to do this. So this is interesting because he says, who is the Lord? He actually asked a question, but I want to skip ahead because a lot of things take place in these next chapters, including some of the plagues. Chapter 10 and verses 1 through 3. Chapter 10, 1 through 3. The Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the presence of your son and of your grandson how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs among them, so that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. This is what God says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Isn't that a good question? Now, this was not a hard trait to figure out what Pharaoh needs, because it's right there in the passage. How long are you not going to humble yourself before? How long are you going to be hard-headed and stubborn? Is basically the question. Why would he ask this question? What's Pharaoh doing at this point? He's just dealt with plague after plague, and his people are dying. Why is Pharaoh not letting them go? There's a lot of pride in him. And it's right there in the passage. How long will you not? By the way, I think about this question to Pharaoh. Does it never play into our time? Yes.
Well, in the Egyptian culture, Pharaoh was considered a god. So there was no reason for him to humble himself or to think that he was wrong in any way, culturally at that time. So stubborn, it's like more stubborn than anything we can imagine, really.
Yeah, people are dying. Oh, he really doesn't let them go until his son dies. And even then, he's not done. He doesn't really want to let them go. He, at a moment, goes, just get out of my sight.
But he goes after.
He thinks himself as a god. How long will you not humble yourself before me? How many people have to die until you do this? Now, hopefully it's not that for us, but here's the thing. How often is the same problem? What do we lack sometimes? Proper humility. This is a problem throughout Scripture. You see people like Pharaoh. We talked about them not being confident in God, but there are people who are also more overconfident in themselves without God. Pharaoh thought he was more important. And that never comes into any play with our jobs, our lives, or the church, where people think they're more important than somebody else. I think that when we think about that, a lot of times that same trait can cause problems. Do all things that it says in Philippians tells us, chapter 2, verse 3 and 4, we should consider others more important than ourselves, right? But that's harder to do. You can say it, but a lot of people don't do it. To think about what others need above their own needs or wants. And it plagues the church as well. It plagues our families. It plagues our jobs. It plagues the whole situation when people are too prideful to see their pride. No matter what gets destroyed around them. And I think that's a hard to overcome. It does wreck homes. Pride is one of the big issues. Like I told you, I deal with marriage home. If one thinks that their needs are more important than another's, we have a problem. We have a problem. And it's hard to overcome that because the pride gets in the way. As I said, in the church, a lot of conflicts are caused because I would like it to be this way. I want it this way. I don't agree with this. And we're not talking doctrine here. I know that there's a difference in doctrine and teachings of truth, but personal opinion. It can happen, like I said, with your word. It happens in our country, right? Our government. Each one has their own way of seeing things, and they'll let everything fall below them before they will admit that they weren't right. There's a lot of things in the scriptures that talk about this. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 says we humble ourselves before God and he will do what? He will exalt us. It's God who gives us the exaltation. Luke 14 and verse 11. Luke chapter 14, read that verse 11. It says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Proverbs 16 tells us pride goes before a fall. Okay? There's a lot of scriptures within it that you can read in the scriptures that talk about this pride. Pharaoh had it, and I think I want you to grasp when God asks questions. By the way, if you actually look at how many questions God asked and Jesus asked in the scriptures, you'll be amazed. And it's not because they didn't know the answer. How long are you going to not humble yourself? That wasn't a question. He wasn't going to the day he died. How many people have to die? How many bad things have to happen until you really realize that you're not in charge? And I think that's important for us to realize that God is the one and the giver of these things. Let's skip one more. Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14. Skip over a little bit. So they leave. Moses goes in. He does all these plagues. He's had all this stuff. He gets to he gets out to the river, and it's with water, okay, and there's no way to cross. There's a lot of questions. You can look at stuff they actually believe. I was looking at something my brother has. They have found statues on one of the sides of the river where it actually says something about the crossing. This is where people cross for Saudi Arabia there. And so they do kind of have an idea of possibly where they crossed. But there was water, okay, and they weren't going to cross anything. This seems like a real weird one because God asked a question. Chapter 14, verses 10 through 16. Let's see, chapter 14, verses 10 through 16. Anybody want to read that?
When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "It is because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to bring us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent."
Okay. Now, we get here, and there's a question that's asked. Why do you,
Because out of Egypt.
well, that's their question. Look at the next
Why did you make
verse.
us leave Egypt?
Yeah, look at the next verse. Why do you cry out to me? Doesn't that seem like a weird question? Why are you crying out to me? Well, I mean, he just did all the plagues, right? Isn't it who we're supposed to trust is in God? Why would God ask, why are you crying out to me? That's a question. Why would you ask that?
He'd done all the plagues and all this stuff, and they reached the heart that they're able to go. Don't they think that he has a plan for how they're gonna get there? And now they got Pharaoh's men on one side and the water on the other, and they feel trapped in between. You know, there's might be some folks that never seen water before, they don't know how to swim. They got children and chariots and food and all this jazz, and they're ready to go, but you know, hell.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting because he asked a question. It seems like, well, duh, because they need your help. Moses it's not just the people, it's also to Moses as well here being spoken to. Why are you crying out to me? What does he tell them the very next statement? Move. Move! Okay. Did they not know did Moses not know the power that was with him that he could do this? I don't know, okay, what Moses knew, but Moses saw the plagues. Moses knew when he did his stick that he thought was just a stick earlier, that things happened. And I think this is a big one for this age in the church and in life in general. There's a lot of talk, not a lot of action sometimes. But what is lacking here is action on their part. God had done everything so far to lead them to this point. He said, go! Okay, they're like, there's water there. And remember the rest of the time?
No faith.
They didn't have faith. Moses put it out, by the way, and it separates and they go across. They're like, we didn't know that's going to happen, I guess. But the reality is, they needed to act. They needed to come up with some thoughts in their own mind. Did they not trust that God could walk it? He had led them to the water, and you remember what led them across into the desert and things? Fire, and a pillar of fire by night, and a cloud by day. So if the cloud moved, by the way, if it's there and it moved toward the water,
That's God right there, but they just didn't.
where were they supposed to go? They were told to follow the cloud. The cloud moved that direction. That means the water. Okay? Moses should have sought, the people should. Action. It's important to act. And I think that's hard we can sit here and study the Bible, we can talk about what we need to do, we can say that the world is lost, but until we do something, or are involved in something, it's not gonna help. That's a weakness within, I'd say, everywhere, our businesses, our lives, yes, sometimes in the church, yes.
It's surprising also that the Lord asked Moses this question right after Moses said, stand firm on what the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you. Having said that, then the Lord asked this question, why are you crying out to me? Yeah, it's like Peter giving that great confession. You're the Messiah.
That's right.
And then 6 days later, he's saying, well, let us build 3 tabernacles.
That's right. And sometimes that's how we are. We speak and don't think.
Yeah.
God's going to save us, but he just sits back. He's like,
Yeah.
then move, go. If God does, it takes God's part and our part. By the way, the Bible talks about this as well. We are to go into all the world, right? To preach the gospel, not don't come in the door. James chapter 2 and verse 26 talks about faith and says faith without works is what? Dead being by itself. Okay, we got to have some kind of action. You can look at 1 Peter 1 and verse 13 and a few others that talks about being doers, being active, going forth. It takes some on our part, which gives me one more that I want to look at, chapter 16. Only got a couple of minutes here. But in the next section, there's another question asked, verse 22 to 30. And this is kind of a longer section, so I'm going to look at it, skip a little bit as we go. The 6th day they gathered twice as much bread. This is when God rains manna. It's in the wilderness. And he says, only gather grain for 1 day, keep nothing overnight. But on the day before the Sabbath, get 2 mounts of grain. Okay, get twice as much because it won't rain on the Sabbath. Guess what they do when the first time it brings forth manna? They try to gather double the grain. What happens to it? It spoils. Which we get down a little bit here. Okay, and it tells them how much. Verse 26, 6 days you shall gather it. The 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Yet it came about in the 7th day that some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. I don't know why they didn't gather twice as much, but they didn't. It says, the Lord said to Moses, now listen to this question. How long did you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? He's not talking just to Moses. How long did you refuse to keep my commandments? How long are you going to continue not to obey? It really is the question. Isn't that the trait that's the big problem here? What are they lacking? Complete obedience. Yeah, they're not obeying. He tells them what's going to happen, and they just can't figure it out. They won't do what he says. Again, I want you, these questions are not just random questions. This question is asked for, how long are you going to not obey, basically, what he's asking here. How long are you going to do whatever you want to do and do it your own way and figure it out that that's not going to work because I've given you specific commands. And this happens also within our lives, personal lives. We go out and try to be a Christian. How long are you not going to obey me and then hope for things to turn out good? But you won't live your life godly, but you hope that God somehow is going to bring... Maybe if you did what I asked, you would have some blessings. How long, if you want the success in the church and for the works of the things going forward, how long are you going to do it if you're not willing to do what needs to be said? How much trouble can we cause not by obeying God in our lives? It's what he's asking. Some of these people, it wasn't all of them that went out, but some of them went out, they did gather. He says, first day I told you, it's only going to be 1 day. Don't keep it overnight. You keep it overnight, it spoils. Okay, your whole house stinks the next day. I tell you, you got to gather twice as much this day, but they don't do that. And really, if you look at the whole desert scene, everything they're told to do, they do it the opposite way. Okay, and you feel like, I get God. God, this ain't the only time he's going to say this. This is a question, though. How long are you going to keep doing it your own way and figure out they don't work? Yeah.
It was probably the people who kept it overnight that went out on Sunday.
It probably is the same people. That's probably true. It's probably true. It's the same people over and over.
They learned
But
that lesson. They're like,
it was enough people to make a big enough difference that he asked this question, how long are you, not just Moses, but the people, going to continue to not listen to my commands? Yes.
I was gonna say, that whole story shows you the grace that God has toward the people. Because at any one of these times, he said, you know what, I'm tired of this. You're not gonna go and listen to me. You're on your own. But he didn't do that. Stay with him, you know. It's just, he's not leaving them. Even though they probably deserve to be left alone.
that summed up the whole Old Testament.
That's pretty much, that's the history of mankind right there. And here's what I want you to know today, 'cause we're out of time. But I do want you to think about this today. These questions that I'm asking, they're all questions to make Moses and the people and whoever think. There's many of these within the scriptures. But a lot of it is the lack in who we are. We have to reason for ourselves. It's the whole goal today. Whatever you gained out of these different traits they didn't have, that's great. But I want you to gain the understanding that God asks questions to get people to grow, to be stronger, to learn what they needed in order to accomplish the plans of God. And for us, we need to continue to put our faith in God. We need to continue to submit to God. We need to continue to let Him help us to grow. And yes, whether it's action, obedience, okay, faith, courage, whatever it is that we're weak in, these are areas we should be working on. God is leading them. And yes, God is always supporting them. He wants them to do well. God wants the blessings of the church today. God wants to help you in your life to be godly, and He wants families to be successful. He wants like marriages to be joyful. But we have to aim ourselves toward God's plan. And all these questions, again, to Moses all the way up. Moses wasn't an ungodly person altogether. But he needed to figure out who is in charge of his life and have faith in that. Yes, Shane.
Can't you see that these questions fit us today too?
They do.
They follow, even though it's history, it's the same history living over and over again. You know, we forget.
So research some questions. There's some other, like I said, Jesus asked a lot of questions as well in order for the people to reason. Reason for yourself. We're out of time. You're free to go.
He's good. He's doing the cut of his arms, starting to move. He's doing therapy. He's doing really good, which is good news. Same difference where I'm going.
Oh, look, I got two plates. That means I can go. Is that what that means?
Again, I got the rental car still today because they're closed. They told me to return it Saturday, so I'm returning it tomorrow morning. Randy has his surgery tomorrow, so I'll be at the hospital with Amy. And then, I can't remember what time, but I'm gonna drop my car off tonight and just let her pick me up when she takes Randy to work.